This is not the most extravagant of starships, in fact it's almost as stripped back as they come. But the Aurora Mark offers a surprising amount of in-game performance in this small but mighty package. But how does it fare when compared with the competition? I'm Forrester, and in this video we'll explore the answer to that question by reviewing the currently flyable Roberts Space Industries Aurora MR, which is described as a light fighter. If you've seen other reviews on this channel, then you probably know what to expect, with this video following the usual format. It's split into 5 sections, starting with a ship tour, assessing combat performance, reviewing handling and visibility, looking at the operating costs before finally summarising. As always, I've included timestamps in the video description in case you want to skip ahead. And if you're one of the 72% of people watching who isn't yet subscribed to the channel, you might consider it, so you can be notified of future Star Citizen videos as they go live. And we start the tour for the Aurora MR by approaching from the front. Underneath at the back there is some storage for cargo which may work in the future, and to get aboard the ship you can enter via one of these hatches located on both sides of the ship. This takes you up into the internal compartment of the Aurora. At the back there is a functional bed for players to use, and at the front there's the cockpit chair. Pretty straightforward really. The Mark is armed with 2 size 1 laser cannons by default, with hardpoints for up to 4 size 1 weapons. In addition, she carries 2 size 1 missiles. That's a fairly modest loadout, although with the upgrade on weapons makes for firepower that can quite easily handle some of the weaker targets in game. Defensively, the Aurora MR carries 2 size 1 shield generators, which is pretty much the standard for a light fighter. Overall, that's not really going to put the Mark in the same firepower camp as a Gladius or an Arrow, but that doesn't mean that the little Aurora isn't capable. Quite the opposite. With some minor upgrades to fill those weapon slots, this little ship proves itself more than capable of dealing with a number of threats. So, for a ship that's marked as a light fighter, the performance is reasonable. In line with many of the other RSI ships, the Aurora MR does have the usual windscreen support struts, albeit the view is still fairly reasonable owing to the cockpit placement right at the front of the ship, and decent visibility above and below too. There are additionally 2 small headlamps up front which can be toggled on for extra lighting in those dark places. In terms of handling, the Aurora MR is better than you might think for what is essentially a flying brick. In part, that's due to the low SCM speed of 147 meters per second, and at that velocity, the Mark handles well. The challenge is that is quite considerably lower than most other fighters, so to keep the pace you'll be pushing higher speeds and sacrificing some manoeuvrability as a result. In terms of straight line speed, the MR can get up to 1200 meters per second, which makes it capable of chasing down many ships, but also potentially outrun by others. Quantum travel is slightly challenging for the Mark. The stock EOS drive is really not great, but because of the fairly small quantum fuel stores, upgrading to a faster drive significantly impacts the range of the ship. So, in the end, this is an Aurora which is likely to work best in a relatively small area. In line with other ships in the Aurora series, the MR is incredibly cheap to operate. If a pilot were to really throw everything on the line, taking damage, firing missiles, refueling the ship, then it's possible to get into the low thousands for Alpha UC, but usually much cheaper. The Mark does have some money-making options available. Firstly, anything from low to medium threat combat contracts are feasible for a fairly skilled pilot, with good money to be made in that space. Unlike many other fighters, there's also internal space to walk about in, which opens up the possibility of running box delivery contracts too. Despite some of the brochureware, not to mention the physical space at the back below the ship, I wasn't able to get the MR to play ball with cargo, so it's possible that it's not currently working for that. Regardless, even if she was able to carry cargo, it wouldn't be enough to make any serious sums of money. In terms of loadout changes, I'd recommend adding ballistic weapons on gimbals to the 2 extra weapon slots, mostly to get the most from the weapon's capacitor and to open up different damage options. The shields can be upgraded to a Concorde or FR66 and maybe Glacier coolers with a quadricell power plant, but most of that is because the upgrades are fairly cheap to do compared with how much the MR can earn. The Aurora Mark is better than you might expect. As a capable combat platform, as a ship with a functional bed to log out with, and as something easy to fly. It's also one of the cheapest ships in the game, at $45 for a game package or 185,000 Alpha UEC from Lorville. It's not the best looking ship I've flown, but there's a certain charm to it nonetheless. But it's not all great. For example, you'd think that having 2 docking ports would be an advantage, and maybe it will in the future, but it seems a bit pointless for a ship of this size, not to mention that those docking ports are likely to be somewhat blocked by the wings on either side. Or the clear addition of the RSI VTOL thrusters on those wings, but that have no in-game operation right now. Or the cargo storage beneath the body, which just doesn't seem to work. You get the picture. And another challenger from the Mark comes in RSI's own line of Aurora offerings, in the form of the Aurora LN or Legionnaire, which carries a marginally higher price tag of another $10 or 340,000 Alpha UEC, but is still relatively cheap in the grand scheme of things, and that's with stronger starting gear and a heavier missile platform. All of that said, the Aurora MR, in line with others in the Aurora series, is surprisingly good, and a refreshing reminder that you don't need to spend a fortune in-game to get a ship that performs fairly well. But what do you think of the Mark? I look forward to reading your thoughts in the comments. And once again, if you're not yet subscribed, you really might consider it if you got this far, as I have a few more Star Citizen ship reviews you can expect over the coming months. It would also be really helpful if you would press that like or dislike button to guide me as to what videos you're enjoying the most, so I can tailor them to you. Otherwise, and as always, thank you for watching.